Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. So we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Roach Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. We just passed 640 and 650 subs. I appreciate all your guys' support, and I hope I can continue to make great content you guys will enjoy in the future. Now, the XFL, it's the final week of the regular season. It's week 10, and there's a lot on the line. Of some playoff spots are up for grabs, and I'm going to go over all of these games and see which XFL teams I think will win these final regular season games. Now, the first game of the week is the Orlando Guardians traveling on the road to the St. Louis Battlehawks. This should be a solid game right here, and there is a lot at stake because if the St. Louis Battlehawks lose and the Seattle Sea Dragons win, St. Louis will not make the playoffs. That will be insane there because they are a team that's 6-3. I kind of wish the rule was where the teams with the best records would make the playoffs, but they have it where two of the best teams from the North and the South both get in. And the way it stands right now is the North is really talented overall, and the Seattle Sea Dragons or the St. Louis Battlehawks might miss the playoffs. But St. Louis, if they get this win, they're automatically in. And they're 6-3 this season, and they have a really talented roster. A.J. McCarron, he was back off of his injury from the previous week. St. Louis barely beat the Vegas Vipers when he was out. But St. Louis last week with A.J. McCarron back, they lost to the Seattle Sea Dragons 30-12, and there was definitely some rust with McCarron. He was 18-32 for 186 yards, a touchdown and 2 interceptions. He played nowhere near as well as he did before his injury, but maybe it was just some rust. Maybe he'll play better in the next game. Marcel Aitman, he had 7 receptions for 99 yards. He had a solid game catching the balls from McCarron. But St. Louis, it is on their own field. I think that will help tremendously because of the fact that their home crowd is definitely one of the best in the XFL. St. Louis loves their team. They don't have an NFL team anymore, and they give it all that they've got for their team being loud and proud. But Orlando, even though they are 1-8, they'll definitely want to potentially spoil St. Louis's party, I think. And Orlando has been a solid team this season. They've had a lot of games where they've been close, but turnovers and penalties, just not getting out of their own way, has cost the Orlando Guardians tons of wins. Last week, they lost to the San Antonio Brahmas 25-23, so they played solid in that game. But Quentin Dormady, he was only 9-17 for 47 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And you also had DeAndre Francois enter the game. He didn't play much better, but Mac Brown, the punter, had a 69-yard pass on a fake punt, so he was the best quarterback of the day, even though he was the punter, so that was a huge play there for Orlando. But Devin Darrington, he had 16 carries for 133 yards and a touchdown. Darrington's been really improving on the ground, playing much better as of late for Orlando. I think Orlando's going to do everything they possibly can to spoil St. Louis's party. I think they're going to play really hard in this game, but I will go with the St. Louis Battlehawks and the McCarron Magic to find a way to win and be able to make the XFL playoffs with a 24-17 win over the Orlando Guardians. It should be a really close game. But our next game on deck is the DC Defenders and the San Antonio Brahmas. The San Antonio Brahmas, they could make the playoffs if they are able to beat DC and the Arlington Renegades lose to the Houston Roughnecks. So they could get in at 4-6. That is crazy right there, how weak the South Division has been. But DC, they are a really tough team to beat. They are 8-1 this season, and they only have one loss to the Orlando Guardians. Of all the teams in the XFL, that is who they lost to. And last week, they were able to barely beat the Arlington Renegades 28-26 in overtime. DC flirted with losing that game, but they were able to find a way to win. Jordan Ta'amu was 14-20 for 188 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception. He did not have his best game, but he did solid enough to find a way to win. And Josh Hammond had 5 receptions for 74 yards and a touchdown. And overall, looking at Josh Hammond, he played solid at the wide receiver position, really caught some great passes from Jordan Ta'amu. But Jordan Ta'amu is going to have a better game if the DC Defenders want to go on the road and beat the San Antonio Brahmas, because you saw San Antonio last week. They beat the Orlando Guardians 25-23. You can tell they really want to have a chance to make the playoffs. Jack Cohn was 25-31 for 302 yards and a touchdown, so he had one of the best games of his XFL career. And Jox Patrick had 20 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown. So the San Antonio offense had a really solid game against the Orlando Guardians, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. DC doesn't have the beer snake this time. They're on the road. DC's been a much better team at home, but they still are a capable team on the road. I think San Antonio is going to give it everything they've got in this game. I feel like Jack Cohn will have a solid game against DC's defense, but I think Jordan Ta'amu will find a way to be able to score a late game-winning touchdown. I'm going to go with the DC Defenders to crush the San Antonio Brahmas playoff hopes and win 31-24, and I think the DC Defenders will move to 9-1. Now on to our next game. You've got the Houston Roughnecks and the Arlington Renegades. Arlington really needs this win to be able to secure a playoff spot. Obviously, if San Antonio already loses, then their playoff spot is clinched. But if San Antonio wins, it puts a lot more on the line in this game. Houston has been struggling as of late. They are 6-3 right now, and Houston has had a pretty solid season. But last week, they barely beat the Vegas Vipers 28-21. And in the last 5 games, Houston has played a lot worse than they did in their first 4 wins of the season. Houston's going to have to play a much better game if they want to be able to beat the Arlington Renegades on the road. Brandon Silvers, he was 16-27 for 105 yards and 2 interceptions. He had an awful game. Brandon Silvers, obviously, he has been coming off of an injury, and I think that has definitely impacted his play, but he's going to have to play much better. He's going to have to limit the interceptions and do a much better job of taking care of the football, but he is a really solid quarterback, but he has struggled as of late. Max Borghi had 10 carries for 74 yards and a touchdown. He had a really solid game, and he's a really good running back, and I think he has a really good chance to maybe be in the NFL eventually. He's playing some solid football, but Houston, it will be a tall task to go on the road, where Arlington, again, wanting to clinch that playoff spot. They're 4-5, and last week, they barely lost to the DC Defenders 28-26 in overtime. They had a really solid game, and I feel like if Arlington plays that well again, they'll have a great chance to beat the Houston Roughnecks. Luis Perez had his best game in an Arlington Renegades uniform. He was 31-41 for 335 yards, 8 touchdowns, and an interception. He had a really solid game besides that pick. Sal Cannell had 7 receptions for 92 yards. Looking at the Arlington Renegades, if they get that type of performance from Luis Perez and they play as hard as they did against the DC Defenders against the Houston Roughnecks, Arlington can very well win this game and clinch their playoff spot. It's on their own field as well, and Arlington has been a team that's been improving down the stretch of the season, I think, but Houston, they still are the better football team overall. If Brandon Silvers can limit the turnovers and have a really solid game, I think that they'll have a great chance to win, and Arlington does struggle on the defensive side of the ball at times. I think this will be a really close, low-scoring game, but I'm going to go with the Houston Roughnecks to beat the Arlington Renegades 21-17 to move to 7-3, but the Arlington Renegades, if the San Antonio Brahmas lose, will still be in the playoffs regardless. Now, on to our last game in the final week of the regular season in the XFL. It's the Seattle Sea Dragons and the Vegas Vipers. The Seattle Sea Dragons, they can still make the playoffs if the St. Louis Battlehawks lose, but if St. Louis wins, then Seattle is unfortunately eliminated, even though I definitely think they are worthy of a playoff spot. They are 6-3 this season, and they have one of the best offensive attacks in the XFL. They've had a really good season overall, especially on offense, and last week they beat the St. Louis Battlehawks 30-12. They were really great on offense, and their defense really stepped up as well. Ben DiNucci, the top quarterback in the XFL in passing yards, he was 21-31 for 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. When he limits his interception numbers, then he is a fantastic quarterback in the XFL. Maybe he wouldn't be a great quarterback in the NFL because of his interception issues, but he is a really solid quarterback, and he's got good weapons to pass the ball to. Jakur Pearson had 7 receptions for 115 yards and a touchdown. You still have Josh Gordon out there as well. I really like Seattle's offense, and I think their defense has improved as the season's gone along, and if they still have a lot to play for, if St. Louis does lose and they still have a chance to make the playoffs, I think they'll really play hard in this game. Vegas is 2-7, and they've had a lot of issues this season. Last week, they lost 28-21 to the Houston Roughnecks. I think they've had good moments this season, and Jalen McClendon has definitely improved the Vegas offense since Luis Perez has gone on to Arlington. He was 27-37 for 249 yards and 2 touchdowns in last week's game against Houston. And John Levette had 9 carries for 46 yards and a touchdown and 4 receptions for 63 yards. He had a really solid game overall. I think that Vegas will play hard in this game to potentially try to spoil Seattle's chances of making the playoffs. If Seattle does have a chance to still make the playoffs, I think Vegas has been playing better as the season's gone along. And overall, I think that the Vegas Viper team is better than the 2-7 record that they are. Kind of like Orlando as well, but they've made a lot of mistakes and have not been able to get out of their own way as well. I think they will try to keep it a close game, but Seattle's offense, even if they don't have a playoff spot on the line, if they're able to win this game anyway, if St. Louis wins, I think Seattle's still going to play hard enough in this game to get the win. Their offense will find a way to blow it open in the second half, and I'm going to go with the Seattle Sea Dragons to beat the Vegas Vipers 28-14 in the final game of the XFL regular season. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the XFL. I think the game of the week might be the Houston Roughnecks and the Arlington Renegades, but all of these games have a lot on the line, and based on what happens on some of these games and the results that occur, who knows who's going to be able to make the XFL playoffs. It's going to be very interesting. But this week, I'm going to go with St. Louis, DC, Houston, and Seattle to all get wins this week. It should be a lot of fun as we end the XFL regular season, and we're going to be moving on to the semifinals and the playoffs once the results of this final week in the XFL regular season ends, and it should be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below what you think about the final week of the XFL regular season, who you think will win the Week 10 XFL games, and which teams you think will make the XFL playoffs. Follow me on Twitter Well, link is in the description, and I will see you next time.